All right, and you're going to give me a countdown? But are you going to give me a countdown, Larry? All right, cool. Waiting for it to pop up. Hey, what's up, everybody? It's your boy Stu here with info.thc. And tonight, we got a very special guest in the house. We decided that we should probably do our best to bring you guys a little information on how cannabis and this COVID-19 kind of work with one another. So we thought we'd bring somebody in who had quite a bit of insight into this whole dealing of cannabis and COVID-19. So tonight's special guest is a gentleman by the name of Bryan Krumm, a great friend of the show. He is a medical professional, or a publicly published medical professional whose study of cannabis has gotten him all sorts of accolades, such as author of the year in some journals, as well as he's been featured in High Times magazine. So, Bryan, welcome to the show. We're going to call this one here Cannabis and COVID-19. So go ahead, Bryan, and introduce yourself. Tell the people all about you.
Well, hello, and thank you for having me on to the show again. I am a psychiatric nurse practitioner. My main primary focus has been on the use of cannabis for treating PTSD. As you mentioned, I do have a publication I authored taking a look at the underlying neurobiological processes involved in PTSD, talking about how those are regulated by the endocannabinoid system, and then discussing why cannabis is so much more effective at treating PTSD than pharmaceuticals. But I've been studying medical cannabis for a very long time. And back in 2002, when the first SARS virus came through, the SARS-CoV virus, essentially the first one, I started taking a look at how cannabis might be able to help in treating this. I knew that cannabis had a huge impact on immune function, and looking at the mechanism of action and how this first coronavirus, the SARS-1, was killing people, I realized that there's a connection here. So I started kind of taking a look at that. When this new SARS-CoV-2 came out, SARS-CoV-2 came out and started causing this COVID-19 disease, I started looking at the use of this again in terms of how it might help in terms of treating patients who are coming down with this COVID-19.
Sounds good.
What happens with this COVID-19 is that the SARS-CoV-2 virus comes in and it tricks your body's normal immune response. What is supposed to happen is when you get a virus, typically your body responds almost immediately with an immune response that's called an innate immune response. And this triggers the release of inflammatory chemicals and cells that kill off the cells that are infected with the virus, so they can kill off the virus before it really has a chance to take hold. And then several days later, the body will initiate a second immune response to turn off that initial one. So it initiates a suppressive immune response before that initial immune response can start to destroy your body. With these coronaviruses, they trick the body's immune response. So instead of getting that initial immune response to kill off the virus, some people get a suppressive immune response first. And so the body, the virus tricks the body into not responding to kill it off, and it allows the virus to really grow and propagate and take over and get a really strong hold in your lungs. And then when your body's normal immune response kicks in, it's an overactive immune response, and it leads to excessive inflammation. It's caused by what's called a cytokine storm. And cytokines are inflammatory chemicals designed to kill off things that are bad. They're important immune, have an important immune function. But when we get this cytokine storm and this excessive inflammation that ties into that, we start seeing that that excessive inflammation starts eating away at the tissue in the lungs, which allows fluids to start to seep into the lungs. Then you start seeing the pneumonia that develops. We also see then as the pneumonia develops, you don't have oxygen getting out to the vital organs like we're supposed to.
And so
And
that's
those
where a
vital,
lot of the big problems are starting to happen with people, where we're seeing people, losing their lives and having really advanced problems from the coronavirus.
oh, definitely. And what will happen is you start to see things like the liver dying off and the heart having problems. Then people will have to be put onto a ventilator. And that creates its whole new set of problems. One of the things that we see happening when the body is deprived of oxygen for a period of time, the cells start to adapt to that. So the cells start to find a way to produce energy using less oxygen. When we put somebody onto a ventilator and we're suddenly flooding with a lot of oxygen, it can cause what's called a ischemic reperfusion injury. And what happens is this overabundance of oxygen now for these cells that haven't adapted back to a high level of oxygen,
Okay.
that starts to cause the production of something called reactive oxygen species.
Okay.
And those start causing inflammation and they start triggering cytokine release and this whole new inflammatory problem. And that ischemic reperfusion injury actually can cause more damage than the lack of oxygen itself for a lot of people. And we don't have the option of really kind of just leaving people off the ventilators, but we can put them on the ventilators, and we have ways that we can tone down that risk for these reperfusion injuries, as well as things that we could do to help prevent us from getting to that point where we have to be put on ventilators.
Okay. And so, with understanding with what info.thc is about, basically about cannabis, and we know what you're about, Mr. Think Green, there on your t-shirt. So, we know what you're about as well. Let us know, what you found basically in 2002 originally when you started looking at the original SARS COVID issue, and how that actually interacted with cannabis, or did you even see any relation there?
Well, definitely. We knew way back then that cannabis plays a huge role in immune function. We knew with that first COVID virus that what it was doing was causing this cytokine storm. And it was this cytokine storm that's actually is what killing people. It's not the virus itself that kills you, it's your body's immune response to the virus that's killing people. We knew back then that CBD had very potent anti-inflammatory properties and could help shut off this cytokine storm. So we knew back then that this could be something that could help. Unfortunately, back in 2002, we didn't really have access to CBD. We
Right.
had access through some of the state medical cannabis programs to higher THC strains of cannabis, but even in those medical cannabis programs in 2002, we weren't seeing much in the way of high CBD strains. And that's a huge benefit that we have now, is that with legalized hemp, CBD is available in almost every state in the country.
Right.
Most people will have access to CBD now where we didn't have that access before.
Gotcha.
We also have a lot more states with medical cannabis laws now, so people have access to the THC also. And it's
Okay.
kind of a complex interaction. Both the THC and the cannabidiol play a role in regulating immune function. Something that we have seen with THC is that it can actually help to reduce viral load. So it might help to prevent those um, the virus from being to really take over, and helps to initiate that initial immune response first the way it's supposed to.
Right.
And then we have the CBD there to help kind of turn off that cytokine storm and switch the immune system back to its normal functional status. So together they work a lot better than either one of those by themselves, which is what we're starting to see now with the new research that's come out since 2002.
I see. And so, knowing who you are, and that are a medical professional in the daytime, but at night you also dabble a little bit. Wouldn't say that you're necessarily a professional in law, but you do dabble and dabble in the law, especially when it comes to cannabis and cannabis laws nationally. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing there, and how that's developing right now. And I'm sure that'll help to take us into the next part of the question.
Okay. Well, right now, what I'm still working on basically an issue that I had started back in 2007 or 2009. I filed a rescheduling petition with the DEA demanding that cannabis be taken out of federal or taken out of Schedule 1 and that they allow research to be done.
Right.
It took them 7 years to actually act on that rescheduling petition. And ultimately, even though they denied the rescheduling part of it, I was able to force the DEA to change their policies. So the DEA is no longer allowed by their own policy to block medical cannabis research, and they are required to allow more people to grow cannabis for research purposes.
Excellent.
We had some other things that happened that came out of that same settlement. Like the DEA had to admit that cannabis is not a gateway drug. Cannabis is not going to cause lung cancer. It does not cause psychosis, and it doesn't cause cognitive decline as you get old. So DEA has actually been forced to take all that kind of information off of their website now.
Excellent.
But when Jeff Sessions came in as our Attorney General under Donald Trump,
Right.
he told the head of the DEA to ignore that settlement that they had with me. Keep blocking the research, take all those applications for new medical cannabis research growers and just sit on them and ignore them. And so when the National Academy of Sciences came out and said that we have conclusive evidence that cannabis is effective for treating pain, I filed a new rescheduling petition citing this new information from the National Academy of Sciences. It wasn't too long after that that Chuck Rosenberg, who was head of the DEA at that point, he resigned.
Gotcha.
He said he doesn't trust this administration to follow the law. He
I
was
recall
the
that.
head of the DEA when I got that settlement in 2016. So they appointed a new head of the DEA, Robert Patterson, and he was the one who actually denied the new rescheduling petition. So I filed an appeal in the Court of Appeals, and a couple of months after that, he resigned. He said that he doesn't know enough about marijuana to be head of the DEA.
There we go.
Unfortunately, this case was in front of a 3-judge panel that consisted of 2 George Bush judges and a Donald Trump judge.
Oh, ouch. Ouch.
So, not surprisingly, they denied my appeal. I took that up to the Supreme Court and filed in the Supreme Court. In July of last year, Supreme Court Press actually made that petition their featured petition of the month. This was about 3 months before the Supreme Court opted to deny my petition for a rehearing.
Okay.
So, and once again, now we're looking at a Supreme Court that's stacked with a couple of Donald Trump justices.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
once again, not too surprising.
Very true.
The problem legally is that the DEA, a long time ago, the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, they forced all these other countries in the UN to sign on to what's called the Single Convention Treaty. And what this does is it says that marijuana is bad. Everybody who's signed on to this has to outlaw, ban marijuana, treat it as a strict criminal violation to use it for anything, and really limit any type of research. And the DEA will argue that it's because we are signed on to this treaty, which is why we can't legalize cannabis here in the United States.
I see.
So because now I have gone through that full legal system up through the Supreme Court, now I've exhausted all my remedies here at the United States level, and now I can actually go to the United Nations and challenge that treaty and try to get cannabis taken out of the Single Convention Treaty, which basically would legalize this throughout the world.
Outstanding.
And
Outstanding.
it also takes away the DEA's standing to say that, oh, we can't legalize it in the United States because we're on this treaty, because that treaty would be null and void.
Outstanding.
So that's kind of where I was focused. And then, of course, this new COVID-19 came out.
Right.
And kind of distracted me from trying to get this legal case together. But
yeah. Now, isn't there news coming out of the World Health Organization who's also involved with all the nonsense regarding the COVID, directing people on what we should be doing on an international level, on a national level through the CDC and all of that stuff? Doesn't the World Health Organization have a different take now on cannabis versus what it did, let's say, 10 years ago?
Well, cannabis has been recognized as having medical value by the World Health Organization.
Gotcha.
However, there hasn't been any action taken to try to correct this inappropriate placement of cannabis in the most restrictive component of the Single Convention Treaty. has just kind of been ignored at the world level under pressure directly from the United States and the DEA.
Of course, of course.
So that's where ultimately we need to try to take a look at that and change it.
All right.
Right now, with this stuff going on with COVID-19, I'm trying to find a way to maybe use this as an opportunity, one, to educate key legislators, governors, members of the World Health Organization, members of the UN Council, in an effort to try to get them to do the right thing and actually change this, because this is something that can't wait for a long, drawn out legal process at this point. We need to have access to cannabis more quickly than that. And a legal case can take years. And it took me 7 years to get this last case through the DEA with that rescheduling petition from 2009 until 2016. And millions of people could die by the time
Absolutely.
at that point.
Absolutely. And so what are some of the reasons that you think or that you found that cannabis is still listed as a Schedule I narcotic?
It's about money, ultimately. The DEA uses cannabis as the major source of their funding, so they can have their high-paying jobs to go out and arrest people for cannabis and steal their property and sell their property and make more money.
Right.
And they don't want to lose control of that. So they really push for this. The pharmaceutical industry pushes for it because they don't want people to grow their Prozac and their chemotherapy in the backyard. They want them to pay high prices to buy their medications from the pharmaceutical industry.
Right.
The liquor industry even pushes back against this. We've seen in states that have legalized cannabis that liquor and beer sales drop off. And so the liquor industry now is a big opponent of this legalization of cannabis as well. So it really comes down to money.
Gotcha. And, you know, I through my own studies, I found that the reason why we're even in this position, or I can't say the reason, but one of the major reasons that we're in this position now regarding cannabis, simply racism. Our good old friend, Mr. Anslinger of the former Department of Narcotics and all of that good stuff, he decided that he wanted to use racial or racial bigotry and all of that stuff to help to promote the prohibition of cannabis. Is that what you found as well?
Oh, absolutely. Harry Anslinger was the major proponent of getting this done. He had come on to into the prohibition era at the very end of alcohol. And when alcohol prohibition ended, he wanted a way to be able to protect his job. And that's
Right.
where they really started to crack down on different types of drugs, and cannabis in particular was one that they really cracked down on.
Right.
They used a lot of racial, racist innuendo to push through these legislative measures in states first, and then by 1937 they were able to push it through at the federal level.
Right.
He continued to push this as the head for over 30, like almost 3.5 decades. He was the head of Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. And he was the big influence in getting marijuana put into the most restrictive status of the Single Convention Treaty and pushing this treaty through the UN. And I mean, his legacy lives on throughout the prohibition, the whole way that they do this with the DEA. I mean, it's targeting mainly people of color. It always has, and
low-hanging
not
fruit.
going to change until it's actually stopped. So.
Exactly. Well, folks like yourself who help help us to understand what this is really all about and how we can progress. This is what's going to make the change happen, period, is people like you. So thank you so much, Bryan. I really appreciate everything that you're doing for the whole cannabis community, man.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely.
You're doing a part getting the word out too with all this. I mean, without this education and the access to actually teach people about this, we're going to go nowhere.
Very true. The word has to get out somehow. So yeah, maybe we can do more of this type of thing in the future. Maybe the people will let us know if they want to hear more from us. We'll see.
Very cool.
So have you thought, basically regarding the COVID stuff that we decided to come on with, the findings that you've been able to come up with? I read through your paper, and it's an amazing paper, and from what I understand, you actually have that now published on your website, right? harmonyspsych.org.
That's correct. I put it, it's in the patient information section at harmonyspsych.org. It's the
Okay.
very first link in there. I decided to just stick this on there as a white paper. It can take months to get something pushed through peer review, and I wanted this information to be out right away. Also, as I started doing this, I realized I can't separate the political aspect from the medical aspect because it's so tied together. And I
Absolutely.
got to a point I was just recognizing this, you know what, in a peer reviewed journal, people aren't going to want to do this. It's too controversial. So I decided to just get the information out there. But it is now openly accessible to anybody who wants to take a look at this and try to understand more about how this works, and also recognize the need for getting this research done. And
Absolutely.
that's something I really push in this, is that um, state governors have the ability to, with medical cannabis programs, can tell their Department of Health, hey, let's start collecting some data on COVID
Right.
and cannabis use. Other countries have the ability to do this. Even if we can't get the DEA to agree to have the federal government do this, it doesn't take much to just start asking questions of people. If they come in, they're positive for the um, SARS-CoV-2 virus, for they have COVID-19,
Hmm.
then you just ask, hey, do you use cannabis or don't you use cannabis? If you
Right.
use cannabis, how often do you use it? Have a couple different choices that they could check off. And then
Right.
monitor those patients, the ones who don't use cannabis versus the cannabis users, and see what the clinical outcomes look like. See which ones progress to full-blown COVID-19, where they have to go under
Right.
respirators. Take a look at those who do end up going under respirators, at the rates of death for people who are using cannabis versus the ones who don't use cannabis.
Right.
Cannabis really has some potent antioxidant activity that can help protect. If you precondition the lungs and the body with cannabis ahead of time, we might be able to prevent some of those ischemic reperfusion injuries from occurring.
So if I understand what you're saying, now forgive me because I'm just a layman here, Bryan. So if I understand what you're saying, those of us who are cannabis users now may actually be protecting ourselves somewhat from actually having some of these horrible interactions if we are unfortunately diagnosed with COVID.
That's what the research would suggest, the research that we have.
Right
I mean, this
on.
is based on two separate lines of research. One line of research is looking at COVID-19 and the cytokine storm. Second line of research is looking at the use of cannabinoids and cytokine storms, and then piecing those two pieces. Well, actually, third line is going to be looking at the ischemic reperfusion injuries in cannabis. So we
Right.
have multiple different areas that we're kind of pulling that information together to create a hypothesis. Until we actually
Gotcha.
have those human studies done, I can't say definitively yes or no, but the research which suggests that heavy cannabis users are actually probably going to fare much better under this than somebody who's not using cannabis at all, because your immune system is going to be able to suppress that cytokine storm and also help to regulate your initial immune response so that your body doesn't get tricked into suppressing that initial immune response that kills off the virus. They have
Right
actually
on.
shown that THC in HIV patients, that heavy cannabis users have lower viral loads and fewer problems with secondary inflammatory problems associated with HIV than the non-cannabis users do. And it may apply to something like this coronavirus as well.
Excellent. Excellent. So have you decided if you are going to take any of these findings that you've come up with or that you found yourself that through your studies and everything, taking basically your hypotheses and presenting it to, let's say, someone like the UN or the World Health Organization as a part of your argument?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm going to be sending out copies of this paper. So I just got it finalized today. So happy 420, everybody.
Happy 420.
Some nice light reading for you if you so choose. But yeah, I'm going to be sending this out to key players in the UN Council. I'm going to be sending it out to people with the World Health Organization, key legislators, governors, people who have the ability to actually make this research happen and potentially to change policy at the world level.
Okay. Okay. So on a professional level, what are some things that you think people themselves can do to help themselves if they feel they've been exposed to the coronavirus, COVID-19, COVID-2, as you're calling it? What are some suggestions for those? Because I myself, I'm not one who generally goes to a doctor for very much. I mean, I have a pretty healthy immune system overall. I think that I can take something like, the COVID, if it were to, I think my body could handle it, I think.
Yeah.
So if there are people out there who are like me who say, look, I probably have it, I'm just going to write it out, I don't need to go and get diagnosed. If they are a cannabis patient, what would you suggest possibly them doing?
Well, one, don't share your pipe with other people. So that's a good starter. Um, you want to mix some CBD in with your THC at this point. CBD and THC together provide a lot better regulation of immune function than just THC by itself. So that's something that you can do. Making sure that you're trying to keep the endocannabinoid system strong and functioning properly. Taking a good omega-3 fish oil and making sure you get plenty of vitamin E by eating a healthy diet with lots of vegetables, especially dark greens and some nuts and seeds. That's going to help our body produce more of the right types of cannabinoids itself, which then allows our body to produce more cannabinoid receptors. Then when you use cannabis, the cannabis has more places to bind to.
Gotcha.
Something else you might want to think about right now, given that we're facing this COVID-19 threat, is pick up a supplement called N-acetylcysteine, NAC. N-acetylcysteine really has some important functions in helping alter the way that the body's own cannabinoids are produced, and it kind of balances that out. N-acetylcysteine is a very potent antioxidant. It's a great mucolytic. It helps kind of get the mucus out of your lungs so you can breathe better. They actually have used it for an IV to help prevent ischemic reperfusion injuries and people who have acute respiratory distress syndrome, which that's what ultimately is what kills people with the COVID-19 is this acute respiratory distress syndrome.
I see.
So this, I mean, the NAC is something that's, you can just go pick it up at a nutritional store. You don't need a doctor's prescription or anything for it. And if you notice that you're getting an upper respiratory infection, start taking the NAC.
Gotcha.
Just to help, just to provide a little bit extra protection against with this and help support what the endocannabinoid system is trying to do to fight this.
Gotcha. And so one other question, and for those who don't know how these interviews work, sometimes we'll prepare the guest with some questions. And so Bryan was not actually prepared for this particular question. This is just something that came to my head while we were setting this up. So see, in my profession, working in a dispensary, managing a dispensary, we understand how certain medications can be, you can find alternates for certain medications that you take from your pharmacy or from your local drugstore. You can replace those with cannabis. And the one that I'm thinking of in particular is ibuprofen. Ibuprofen, from what I understand, has terrible effects regarding that cytokine storm and other issues regarding basically dilation and constriction of vessels that go between the lungs, the heart, and all of that stuff. So some people may say, hey, look, I'm not supposed to take ibuprofen. Why should I take CBD if that is the cannabis alternate?
And actually with the ibuprofen, there were some initial stories that came out saying the ibuprofen may be bad. When you actually try to chase down the research, this was something I was trying to look into when I was writing the paper. There's nothing to really support that fear from the ibuprofen. There was concern that maybe shutting off that initial inflammatory response might allow the virus to replicate more. It was kind of unclear what they were trying to say with the ibuprofen. We do know that something like a prednisone, which is a potent, it's a steroid,
Right.
and it shuts down immune function. The idea is not to shut down immune function. The idea is that we need to regulate immune function. And that's what the cannabis does. The CBD doesn't shut off the immune system. It regulates the immune system. Just like THC helps to regulate the immune system, it doesn't shut it off.
Gotcha.
So that's what we're
helps
looking
to create
for.
the proper balance.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So, we're running real low on time here, Bryan. So, I mean, is there anything else that you think the people need to know about cannabis and COVID-19?
Um, like I said, we have some very good research suggesting that there might be a benefit from this, but we don't have the human studies to actually prove this. We've got to get this research done. That means people need to be calling their legislators. They need to be demanding that they start looking at this, that they allow the research, that they not just allow it, but they start funding this research. The government is not offering us any legitimate treatments for COVID-19 at this point. It's up to your body to kind of treat this and cure it. If your body is strong enough, for people over 65, it's a lot more likely that they're going to be the ones who are dying from this. Even though anybody over 20, we're seeing really high rates of hospitalization for anybody who's over 20 years old who comes down with this virus. So it's not just old people who are getting this. If you have a cough or if you're sneezing, wear a mask to kind of cover that and keep it to yourself. Make sure that you're keeping your hands washed and clean. One of the biggest risks is that you're going to go out and you're going to touch a surface where somebody coughed or sneezed and the virus settled down onto a surface, and then you touch that and then you pick your nose or rub your eyes, and now you've just got it in through a mucous membrane. So if you have to pick your nose, wash your hands first and afterwards. Might be worth washing.
Don't shake my hand.
Yeah, and you might want to wash your hands before you use the bathroom as well as after, especially women.
Absolutely.
Or
Especially
wiping the vagina, you have mucous membranes there. You don't want to get that virus into anything that's a mucous membrane.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Well, Bryan, how can the people get in touch with you, especially here in New Mexico? You're New Mexico based. You are a licensed prescriber for the New Mexico Cannabis Program. If people want to get in contact with you personally, how can they find you?
Best way is to go to the website, harmonypsych.org. There's a lot of information there. It does have our contact information listed there. You can always call us, 505-265-4835. But if you're just looking for more information, there's a lot of pertinent information at the website, especially if you go into that patient information section. Like I said, that article that I just finished, that's going to be the very first link in the patient information section. The second link takes you to the paper that I had published on cannabis for treating PTSD. And that's where the cannabis or the Nurse Practioner Journal made me the 2017 Nurse Practioner Author of the Year for that. So like I said, I got other links to really great resources in there if you want to learn more about medical cannabis.
Excellent, excellent. And for those who don't think that I'm actually out here reading his paper, here it is here, okay? This is Bryan's official paper, actually. This is probably not even the completely official done copy, so you're going to even have a much better version than what I have. But for a layman like myself, it actually was a pretty easy read. So thank you very much for making it easy enough for people like me to read.
Yeah, it took a while for me to be able to kind of put this together and piece it all together myself. So
right.
Eventually,
well, Bryan Krumm,
together, so.
We appreciate you coming on, man. You're such a friend to the info.thc group here on this side, and hopefully you'll become a friend to those who've been watching the video as well. So I want to thank you so much. We're honored to have you tonight, man. And maybe we'll do this again as more information develops.
Very good. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Bryan, we'll get with you soon, man.
Okay, cool.
I'll talk to you.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. You too.